Hey everybody, welcome to Outside Ourselves, a podcast that features conversations reminding us faith is not something we do, it's something we receive. I'm Kelsi, and today I'm chatting with writer and musician Andy Squyres about his newest book of essays. The book is called Poet Priest Volume 2. It's filled with what Andy describes as mini essays. Most of these started from Instagram posts, actually, and that is actually the way that I first heard about Andy and found his writing. Andy comes from a completely different Christian background than I do, but we meet in the same space when it comes to this idea that in Christ we are free. We are free to live actually small and mundane lives where we don't have to prove anything, we don't have to climb any ladders. And Andy is so amazing at giving this idea life with his words and in our conversation. I hope you enjoy the show. Andy, thanks so much for joining today. I'm so excited you're here. I feel like I just want everyone that I know to know about your writing. I share it all the time on Instagram. So really, really grateful for your time this morning. And I would love to if you wanted to kind of tell us who you are, what you do, give us some background on who you are, that would be great.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. My name's Andy Squyres. I am 49 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have been in pursuit of words one way or another, I guess my entire adult life. I've always had an affinity for language. My grandmother was an English teacher. My parents, they brought me up to love reading and stuff like that. But I started as a songwriter in my teens and early 20s, and then eventually made my way in the music world, and had nothing like monumental success, but I had over the years developed a following with my music and stuff. But then around 2020, late 2020, it's really interesting. I stumbled into the writing side of my life. I've always written, like I've always kept journals. I'm always writing thoughts down, but never have I had the thought of like being a writer or publishing my work so that people could read it. I never thought my emphasis has always been in music. But in I believe it must have been 2021, early 2021, I had put out this record called Poet Priest, and spent a lot of money on it. And the amount of money that we spent making the record was such that when we were done with it, we didn't really have any marketing money. And it's so funny because we live in a world now where you literally have to spend advertising money or marketing money in order for people to like listen to your stuff like for free, right? On the streaming platforms. So I've got this like team of people that I work with my, graphic stuff and design stuff. And they said, Andy, maybe you should just take the themes from your music and just start like diving deeper into those themes in some just Instagram posts. And so we were just thinking about getting the word out for the record. But what happened was, those posts took on a life of their own, and they began to go further and farther than anything I had ever seen or experienced myself personally with any of my public facing work. I call them mini essays. Those mini essays just went further than I'd ever imagined. And, we just started adding thousands of people in the span of months because they started spreading back to your original question, I have stumbled into being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have it's really taken me by surprise. It's taken my family by surprise. Um, and so, but I enjoy it. I should say that it's not something that I don't like doing. I really like doing it. And I want to get better at it. I'm kind of like imagining the next phase of my writing life
Mm.
beyond the Poet Priest volumes, so yeah, so that's actually how I got started.
That's so interesting. And I want to talk a little bit more about those specific volumes you mentioned, because you've now put out two that are kind
Mhm.
of a compilation of those mini essays that you were talking about on Instagram.
That's
Is that
right.
right?
That's
Yeah, and
right.
they're beautiful. They're we got the second one, and it's so well designed and thought through. And it just in response to what you were talking about with Instagram, Dave Zoll, who I had on earlier, he told me, and I don't know if he got this from somewhere, if this is just his term for you, but he called you the prophet of Instagram, which I think is a very fitting title. What do you think? I mean, you're on tour now, like you're talking with a lot of people. What has kind of what have people told you has struck a chord with them from your
Yeah.
writing? Like, why do you think that this happened?
Yes. Now, first of all, that's so funny that's what Dave said.
Yeah.
Like, I think, I mean, he he teases me somewhat about my dubious fame on Instagram, and it
He's not wrong, though. He's not
right.
wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and anyways, I want to treat it respectfully, but I need to take it lightly at the same time. So I really do appreciate, Brother Zoll's take on that.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say this: uh, I have thought pretty intently about why these particular essays have touched the nerve, and um, for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with the work,
Yeah.
they're all over the map in terms of what the topics are. I mean, I people ask me what I write about. I would typically say I write about death, sex, money, labor, family, faith, like all of those things. Those
Yeah.
are like all of the kind of like building blocks of human life.
Mm.
And then I'm obviously dealing with my own angst with regards to faith in the secular world, I would
Mm.
say. And so, but why I think my particular voice has maybe stood out is because I I would say that I'm pushing back against two different specific streams.
Mm.
And one would be against my own tribe, which is, deeply Protestant with Pentecostal charismatic leanings.
Okay.
And so I would say that framework is the one that I come from. And so I do have a critique for my own family to give. And I think that I've heard from a lot of evangelical people who want so much to stay within faith, Christian
Mm-hmm.
faith, but they don't know how to do it with the 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 worldview that they've been given from their evangelical upbringing or
Mm.
even current situation. So I would say that's one thing that I'm pushing back on. But I would say that the other thing that I'm really pushing back on is wholesale deconstructionism, that I would
Yeah.
say is running rampant,
Yeah.
not only in the world but through the church. And so the concept that I feel like passionate to challenge is that a lot of people who find themselves deconstructing, they actually believe this thing that they are unique, that they have arrived at these conclusions through some self-enlightenment. And all I want to ask people is, please at least remain aware that what you're doing it's the zeitgeist. It's the moment that we're in. It's the culmination of 150 years of postmodern thought, I would say.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that if you're going to be honest about, if you're going to give a faithful critique of your faith experience, you can't, I would say you must give a faithful critique of your deconstructing experience. And I don't find much of that happening at all. And so your original question is, why have I touched a nerve? I feel like I'm trying as much as I can to make a case for what I would say would be a reasonable ground of being. Like I'm all in on Jesus. I am. I'm 100%. I make no bones about that. If somebody came up to me, and I mean, I have a lot of evangelical brethren that are like abandoning the evangelical tag or, title. And I can appreciate that. But I'm like, I see a lot of people just like using language like, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm not a Christian, or I'm spiritual, but I'm not a Christian. And it's like we're afraid of distinctives at this point. Everybody is very afraid of distinctives, Christian distinctives. And so I feel like that is a really, I think that will injure you in the long run, denying the Christian distinctives. I don't know if I've made any sense just now.
No, I think I have like a million questions now. I think that's so true. I'm kind of curious, like, why do you think people are abandoning those distinctives? And then these are two like very big questions.
Yeah.
The second question is, why do you think abandoning those distinctives is so harmful? I mean, I have like my own answer for that, but I'm curious kind of the reason that you've kind of found is important to cling to those distinctives. Yes.
Well, I would say that at the baseline of my work, what I'm trying to refute at all times is the utilitarianism of secular culture, where what we do is we like to tell ourselves we're rational creatures, and we make decisions only on what is useful, which I think that's a huge mistake. But what I'll tell you right now is that my answer to that question is very utilitarian. I believe that Christian distinctives are important to confess and to hold to, because I don't have another option. It's a very brass tacks answer, because like Peter being confronted by Jesus, will you leave me also, Peter? And Peter's like, I'd like to, but I don't know where else to go. Like, that's really how I feel, because there have been enough examples around me of, people that I've known privately, and then we know enough people in the public sector too, who have kind of like left some version of Christian faith, whether it's evangelical or mainline high church thing, and they've gone off. The thing that I've observed is that not many people maintain a neutral atheism where they become purely rationalists or materialists. Right. Yeah. I've not observed that very much. In fact, most of the people that I know who have left Christian faith have gone on to become inventors of their own new religion.
Yeah.
And I, for one, am not smart enough to do that. I don't know where I would even begin. And I actually think that might be the burden of our age,
Hmm.
is that when we throw off the burden of Christ, which he has so graciously given us, what then happens to us is that we become responsible for being our own gods or creating our own gods. And I think that that's a project that's fun for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like people
Yeah.
throw off the chains of the church and they go, oh, what a relief. What a relief. Now I can do anything I want.
Yeah, what you said about like the burden of self-creation,
Yeah.
which is all we see all over the world, all around us. And it's I think it's our fallen human nature to want to self-create. Like we all, even even Christians, I think, fight this, what is sin, which is this idea that you can self-create, that you can be
Yeah.
your own God. Like in our tradition, or in my tradition, we say you're either bound to sin or you're bound to Christ. um,
Yes.
and I think that that's something you're doing so beautifully, is reminding people that we are creatures, that we
Mhm.
are human, and what that actually means, and the gift, I think you said, the burden that Christ puts on us, the gift of being God's creatures. That means we
Yes.
have a creator, and that burden of taking care of ourselves is taken away. You're
Well,
doing.
and
Yeah,
another
go
thing,
ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
Just I was talking with a friend this past weekend, and we were talking about the amount of we had both watched. There's a HBO documentary on this. I think it was called Nexium cults,
Yes, yeah, I'm
and
watching that right now.
yeah, it's so fascinating. But we as we were talking, we had both come to the same conclusion that I tend to walk around thinking that Christians are strange beings in this world because we we speak and worship to a God that we can't see, and we have all of these rituals or practices that to an outsider with no context is just straight up weird, right?
Mm,
And the mystical side of that especially. And
mm,
so I'm just always assuming that everybody else in the world they're just rational creatures who have figured out a way to just live happily in this life. But when you look at, for instance, in the Nexium cult, the people that are attracted to that situation are some of the most brilliant, like highly intellectual, highly talented. These are not dummies. These are not
yeah.
people who are signing up for this. I mean, and what that says to me is it doesn't matter who you are, how strong you may be in your intellect or your body or your mind. You might have talents off the chart. There's something within the human creature that is desperate for a
Mm,
transcendent God or way of life or whatever. And so um I don't think that Christians are as crazy. I mean, we do have our crazy aunts and uncles, of course, but I think within just all of the great ideas of the world, I think that we actually have, dare I say, um, a rational uh, case to make
yeah.
for the man Jesus Christ. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I would say reason isn't going to get us to faith, but reason can completely support and
Yes,
uplift faith. And that's important. I think
it
especially
is.
for people who are thinkers and intellectuals, that's that's important to bring out. I think it's,
Yes,
like I said, it's important to still make that distinction, but
yes,
I agree 100%. God doesn't work in weird ways just to be weird.
that's
He explains things to us through His Word. So yeah, I
right.
think that's a really really good point. You also, I feel like I mean, we've kind of talked about this, but you write a lot about the freedom that's found in like an ordinary mundane life. I'm curious if those types of essays and posts have struck a chord um, more or less for other people, and also kind of if you've gotten any pushback against that theme in your writing.
Yes, I think that has been very uh, that particular theme has been, I would say, very meaningful to a lot of people. Uh, I mentioned earlier coming out of a charismatic, well, not coming out of, but I'm still in a charismatic Pentecostal world most of the time.
Okay.
And I think that there has been such an emphasis on the power of God, the miracle working power of God,
Yeah.
which I'm super grateful for. In fact, I recently heard a lecture from, oh gosh, I can't remember the man's name, but this guy was making this case about how like the Protestant Reformation just really ushered in the age of the non-miraculous age, like
Hmm.
that the reformers were so insistent upon like a rational view of faith that they had no place for like the miraculous. And what's so funny is that the Catholic Church at that time was mishandling belief in the miraculous, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
of course the reformers were coming against that. And we see that to me, we see that in this day and age where uh like the beauty of the Pentecost that was, or the spirit that was poured out at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, the things that God meant for the thriving of the church, they always end up being co-opted by, you know, people who are trying to utilize those things to their advantage, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I think that I'm constantly worn out by just every prosperity gospel preacher that we see coming down the road.
Yeah.
Um, but what's so interesting to me right now is that there's the crazy guys that are just way out on the fringe, and they may have even big followings, but what's happened is that those fringe beliefs within Pentecostalism have have taken over, I would say, evangelical culture in general.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, I mean, I could spend hours talking about this, but just even our worship, even our worship, everything is big.
Yeah.
Everything is built on this theme of like victory, triumph,
Yeah.
and goodness gracious, the Christian faith is a triumphant. There is a triumphant end to this. There is a thread of redemption. I mean, if we don't have that, what do we have? We
Right.
don't have much, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For
Um,
sure.
but what we've done, as far as I can see, is that we've told people that they can have a better life based upon whether they have faith or not.
Hmm.
So if they want more of something, whether it's health, prosperity of any kind, your issue isn't that um you I don't know, your issue isn't that you just don't have that stuff. It's that you don't have enough. You haven't tapped into the faith that's available
Hmm.
to you so that you can amass the blessings of God
Hmm.
into your life. And I know that's going to sound really strange to a lot of folks that aren't in the world that I'm talking about,
Yeah.
but I think it's pretty dominant at this point, and so guys like Wendell Berry, guys like Robert Capon, uh, thinkers like that, Henry Nouwen, these people are pointing us to the small life,
Yeah.
the small and obscure life. And at this point, I feel my age. I'm getting older. Um, there's no chance of me being, like, I don't know. This is like, seems like every worship leader now is gorgeous, and every celebrity preacher is like muscle bound and perfect teeth, and
Yeah.
you know the deal. It's like it
Yeah.
sounds weird even coming out of my mouth, and none of that stuff is even really a problem, but it's like we're our subculture is just so saturated with everything being good all of the time,
Yeah.
so that when somebody's going along in their regular life, and like terrible things may happen, or maybe you just have like a series of years where nothing happens and you just have this kind of like mundane life.
Yeah.
Was that to say you're not blessed, or that God doesn't think much of your life? I would say no. It's like, it's the exact opposite of that. It's like, well, welcome to the world. This is the life God gave us, and we kind of have to just make the best out of that. So
Mm-hmm.
inviting people into that place, I have gotten so much communication from people who have said to me, what a relief. What a
Yeah.
relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the project of getting your life to be perfect is like, I just want to tell people that will never happen.
Yeah.
It will never happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's okay if you try to make your life better. I mean, I'm still trying to pay my mortgage. I'm trying to raise my kids well, and all of that stuff. I'm not making a case for not doing anything, but I would say that faith is not a silver bullet. It's not a magic wand.
Yeah.
Worship is not a rain dance that we do in order for God to get to us.
Right.
That's all of those things are the misconceptions that at least my tribe is giving the world, that I am actively trying to resist. And inviting people into their ordinary lives, I think, has
Mm.
been something that people have appreciated.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hearing that is such a relief, like you said, for people, because there's freedom there. There's freedom to be able to say, I don't have to climb the ladder to God. God is here and he loves me, and I can go about my day to day. And then love my neighbor because of that. Like actually
Yes.
love the person next to me. This might be a weird reference, but I just watched, there's that new Selena Gomez documentary on Apple TV. And man, this is how I read it. I watched it and I felt so much, I felt bad for her. I felt pain for her, because you see her struggling with all of this stuff, which she's, I think there's on one hand, it's beautiful that she's kind of being really honest with mental health. And I think that can be really helpful for people. But what I saw her struggling with was this idea that she has a higher calling as a pop star that she has to fulfill.
Yeah.
And she doesn't ever say this explicitly, but I know she's a Christian, and some of her friends kind of said things around these lines of like, you have to do this for God, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to impact this number of people. And you can tell that just weighs on her in a way that affects everything. When all she really wants to do is just like be a normal person and go and love others. And, that's her decision to make. And not to say that what she's not doing right now isn't where she should be or whatever, but that image came to mind when you were talking about all of this, is this idea of, as Christians, we have to fulfill this higher calling, is such a lie. It's not biblical, I don't think.
Well, and I would say that the gods of the world are real, and
Mm.
and powers and principalities are real, and evangelical Christians are not immune to being influenced by the powers and principalities of this age. And I would say that one of the if evangelicals were to have a collection of household gods, I would say one of the ones that we bow at the altar of is the word impact or
Hmm.
influence.
Hmm. Yeah.
We feel like we're like I grew up hearing destiny language, like
Yeah.
you have a destiny from God and your destiny is greatness and your destiny is to change the world and your destiny is to, you know, I've heard from so many people that have been embroiled in that framework. I feel personally so relieved that I don't have to be anybody.
Yeah.
I can be nobody and
Right.
be totally fulfilled.
Hmm.
And I think that fame and celebrity is one of the most mm, inhospitable things that a human being can hold within their body.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the idea that they're, I mean, I can't think of a worse life than to not be able to go to the grocery store
Yeah.
without somebody walking up to me and saying, "Are you so and so?" Like, I think anonymity is a gift of grace.
Hmm.
Obscurity is a gift of grace because what it allows for us is it allows us to be a part of a community
Hmm.
that loves us not based upon our talents and our gifts and our whatever our you know, I mean, it's American Christians have created such a strange relationship with people who have talents
Yeah.
and or looks or whatever. And I do understand the irony of just even having this conversation with you because I am a little bit well known, right?
Yeah.
I wrote a book
Yeah.
and I travel for a living playing music. And so it does feel a little weird, but I'll say my wife, Amy, and we do wrestle with this all the time. And we're always trying to like build our lives to being like more Wendell Berry and less Stephen Furtick, you
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
not to pick on old Stephen, but you know, like,
Yeah.
that's just not where we want to live our lives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's so antithetical to everything American, I think. This part of Christianity, which is a part of Christianity um, that God, that who you are is not what you do, right?
That's
That your identity is in Christ and that you need Christ. Like you're not growing away from your reliance on him in this life. You're growing more and more dependent on him.
right.
That is just not the way we want to do things, I think. Um, you write also a lot about what I've picked up on is a lot of your writing kind of centers around suffering. Uh, and this goes into kind of what you've already said, but the idea that suffering isn't something that we can just avoid. I think you just said faith isn't a silver bullet in life in general, but particularly when it comes to suffering. How do you see that kind of playing a role in the Christian life? And what has kind of been I mean, you don't have to go into anything at all if you don't want to, but what has been your experience with that? Because you write so honestly about it. I guess that's why I'm curious a little bit.
Yeah, I actually I put this in one essay recently, but I did a little inventory about my life, and I have had 8 acute suffering seasons in my life,
Hmm.
and they were, you know, I'm like I said earlier, I'm 49, so I'm pushing on a half a century, and so from I would say from my childhood up until you know, I've had a pretty good couple years recently, but prior to this, I've had some pretty huge setbacks, and
Hmm.
um, it's like you don't want to get into the struggle
Yeah,
Olympics,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's good to give the specifics because people, they need to know. But like in 2009, we were in a church where a really good friend, a dear friend, who I would consider a pillar in our church. He was murdered. So it's like you
Oh my
it's
gosh.
almost like car crashes we can deal with. Like, I don't know, like car crashes are those are like things that happen, but when somebody is murdered, it's like
Yeah.
there's a violation of there was so much violation. And so I've had I've had that, and then I've had two of my really closest friends die in their early 30s to
Hmm.
cancer,
Hmm.
um and all of that, at least in my church context, we're a praying people. And so when we when somebody gets cancer, like, we just head for the altar. Like, that's what we do. We're a praying people. And so, which I think is brilliant. I if I get cancer, I'm calling up all of my friends that believe that prayer works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um so in this tends slightly in a more philosophical realm, but I've had I've had to work really hard to understand the theology that I was given in my Pentecostal world compared to my experience in the world. And that's been my greatest
Hmm.
work, probably. Because, I mean, you asked earlier if I had gotten any pushback on, like, inviting people into the simple life. And I have, because at some point I wrote an essay to the effect that health and wealth are not proof of the blessing of God in your
Hmm.
life.
Yeah.
And I had all kinds of people coming after me on
Wow.
that, because they had been so entrenched in this idea that if you were healthy and you had all your needs met, you were doing something well, you were doing something right, you and
Hmm.
God were good with each other, which is a completely ungraceful way of understanding
Yeah.
God's goodness, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I could relate with those pushbacks, though, because that has actually been my struggle.
Hmm.
If God is good, then why are people murdered?
Yeah.
Why do people get divorced?
Yeah.
Why do people have stillborn babies? Why do people die from cancer when they're 32? I was just reading this article on the philosopher Simone Weil last night, or the night before. And this was a woman who had an intellect that very few walking on the planet ever have, but she died when she was 34. Like,
Hmm.
her body gave out on her. And I was just reading the article, just fascinated. Like, and so I know this is an easy way out, and I hate to say it because it's so common, but it's like, if we as believers, which I am from a tribe that does this, but we don't acknowledge the mystery enough,
Hmm.
then we will be in just this constant spinning out of maybe being disappointed with God, or I don't know. Like, I think that maybe has been some of my motivation to, like, write through this stuff, because I sense that in my soul I had some disappointment with God
Hmm.
that was different than the sadness that you would naturally feel going through some of these things. But
Yeah.
it would be more like, wait a second, these people told me that you were good, and the definition of your goodness was that you would get us out of these problems, or that you would protect us from these problems.
Yeah.
And that's not what you do at all.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of that writing has come from, because so I started reading Beyond My Tribe and realizing that, oh, suffering has always kind of been part of the human condition.
Right.
And following Jesus, contrary to what many are saying right now in 21st century Christianity, following Jesus is not a get out of jail free card from life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Life just happens, and you're following Jesus. And if you don't bow before the mystery of that, then you're going to be in a whole lot of existential trouble. As at least that's what I've experienced.
Yeah. You talked some about how your definition, or the definition you were given of God's goodness, wasn't really matching up with your experience, which I think is so true for so many people. How would you say, kind of working through some of what you talked about, and even just writing in the past couple of years, has that changed your definition of God's goodness at all?
Well, here's where I'm at. And I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but I think that many people are going to discover this through their suffering. And it is this: the goodness of God is so good that God refuses to give us the miracle that would keep us from discovering who he is in a way that can only be discovered in some really difficult places. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like
I think so.
I can honestly say this from the depth of my being. I have found and tasted something of Jesus so profound that I could not have known otherwise, except through those paths of deep suffering. And I don't, this is the strange part, is that I'm not a Calvinist. I don't even believe that God is this puppet master who is kind of like making all of these things happen so that we can suffer, so that we can find these things out. I am in the Robert Capon camp, and Capon would tell you that chance, capital CHANCE, chance is baked into the design of creation. It's actually the mechanism of creation. And so things happen. Like there are things like car accidents and cancer diagnosis and all manner of difficulties that we face in this life. And I don't believe that God is sovereignly moving chess pieces in order for these things to happen. And of course, that's a whole nother podcast episode, and much smarter people need to be involved in that than I am. But my conclusion is that grace is exploding. It is bursting forth into the earth as we become aware of it. This is where the mystical gets involved. There are mystical experiences to have with our Savior that really do break forth in our dark troubles, you know. And I do not mean to make light of people's troubles by saying that. Like, I'm not trying to diminish, like, these are the places that people go to and live through are very difficult. And I would never want to, you know, like make this little conclusion that I'm giving, like, oh, well, here it is, all wrapped up in a bow. But I'm just trying to express with the few words that I can muster to say that there really is a reality to knowing God that cannot be experienced if the world was just simply perfect.
I don't know if you've heard of this distinction between a theology of glory and a theology of the cross. It's something, have you?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
Okay. I feel like a lot of what you're saying is falling into those categories, and the idea
Yes.
that while we are all theologians of glory, not meaning that this isn't to say God's glory is bad, but what's meant there is that we're trying to create our own glory.
That's right.
And that's how we view the world. That's how we view God. What's happening through faith in Christ is theology in the cross, which is actually done to you, sometimes through suffering, but also like most specifically through the suffering of Christ on the cross. And that has to be like given to you, is how I would say it in the Lutheran tradition. So I don't know. I feel like you kind of are dancing around that idea of like God, God's goodness is so good and we are so incapable of seeing it that sometimes it comes across as something that's hard for us. I don't know. Is that kind of?
Yes. Yeah, I think you're saying it perfectly. Yes. So are you telling me you're a Lutheran?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm always 2 inches away from becoming a Lutheran, man.
Okay. Come on over.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. I've just enjoyed talking today. I feel like I could talk for hours, but I know your time is limited and you need to go. Before I let you go, can you tell us a little bit about what's coming up for you? As far as I know, like I mentioned earlier, you're on tour, kind of where you're headed, and then also where people can get Poet Priest Volume 2.
Yeah, I mean, depending on when this podcast comes out, I don't know if this will be matter or not, but I've got 12 shows in the state of Texas and Oklahoma over the next 10, 12 days. You can find all of that information out on my Instagram, which is Andy Squyres. But more importantly, my new book, Poet Priest Volume 2, which is filled with all of these essays that we've been talking about today, that can be purchased at my website, andysquyres.com. So get yours just in time for Christmas.
Yes, perfect time to pick it up. It's beautiful. It's like it's a great coffee table book. Is that kind of what you had in mind when you designed it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's great. Well, thank you, Andy. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for talking.
Thanks so much. This has been great.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast. To learn more about all of our podcasts, please go to 1517.org/podcasts. I mentioned this last episode, but if you have enjoyed the episodes that have come out so far of Outside Ourselves, I'd really, really love if you could give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you can subscribe, that's also helpful. These are really easy and simple ways that you can support Outside Ourselves and help other people find the show. Thanks so much.